One of the problems with recruiting for investment banking is not the knowledge or skills you acquire, but the access to talk with real investment bankers to put your best foot forward. Our sponsor, WSO Academy, can provide those connections with 60 head mentors who are finance professionals at top firms like Goldman, Centerview, and JP Morgan. Imagine being able to get on the phone within 24 hours with one of the Academy's 1,300 mentors right before a critical interview. Get on the waitlist for WSO Academy today by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting wallstreetoasis.com/academy. All right. Welcome to Investment Banking Insights. This is the only show dedicated to helping you learn both the technical and non-technical aspects of the investment banking process. My name is Alex Mason. I am your host, recording live from Ithaca, New York. Shout out to all my friends out there in New York City, grinding, getting it in, doing those interviews, doing those events, on their way to getting their much-deserved offers. Shout out to you guys. You guys are awesome. Let's go ahead today and talk about mergers and acquisitions. Specifically, we're going to talk about transaction structures today. And transaction structures are really important when it comes to mergers and acquisitions because the structure can set the tone for and even define a huge part of the deal itself. One thing that I think about is Warren Buffett. Years ago, I read Warren Buffett's biography, The Snowball, which I definitely recommend if you're interested in this kind of stuff. And it's interesting because Warren Buffett, people think of him as this amazing stock picker, amazing investor, and he is all of those things. But one of those things that sets him apart is he knows how to structure a deal very particularly for his benefit. And so it's not just the actual assets that he purchases, it's the way that he purchases them that can make a huge, huge difference. And so we can apply that same principle when we're thinking about transaction structures in M&A deals as an investment banker, because the way that we structure the deal for our client can go a huge long way in helping them meet their objectives. So we've talked about this concept before, but let's go ahead and summarize and review. What are the three main transaction types when one company buys another? Well, number one, there's stock purchases. Number two, there's asset purchases. And number three, there's Section 338H10 elections. And each of these has pros and cons and is applicable in different situations. So let's go ahead and go over these now. First of all, we have stock purchases. This is when the buyer acquires everything. They just buy the entire company, and this includes off-balance sheet items as well. So literally everything that company owns, the entire balance sheet, it just goes to the new company. Another aspect of this kind of purchase is in a stock purchase, the seller is taxed at the capital gains rate. So they're taxed based on the fact that they are selling their entire company, kind of like if you and I sold a stock, which is literally a tiny, tiny piece of ownership in a company, we would pay capital gains rate taxes. Well, the company itself would pay capital gains rate taxes. Another thing here is that when the buyer purchases the company in a stock purchase, they don't get a step up in their cost basis for the assets that were acquired as part of the deal, which means that they don't get any tax breaks there. And they also can't depreciate or amortize those assets that they're acquired. So the reason that deferred tax liabilities get created is because of asset write-ups in this exact scenario. Because if you can't step up your basis, then you've got to record this difference between what you actually acquired the asset for if you're the buyer and what the asset's cost basis was on the books of the seller. And so you account for those differences with DTLs, DTAs, so on and so forth. And we talked about that at length. And then this kind of transaction, you see this with large private businesses, with publicly traded businesses. It kind of makes more sense for kind of a bigger company to buy in this way. I think I'm trying to actually understand the nuances of why that is, but I believe it has to do with the fact that it's just more simple. If you are a large conglomerate, for example, if you're buying a smaller company, you just want to buy the whole thing. You don't want to deal with buying pieces of it or having different types of tax rules for specific niche circumstances. Like, no, you just want to buy the company and be done and move on. So that's my hypothesis. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that. But that's number one. Purchase structure number two is an asset purchase. Now, in an asset purchase, the buyer doesn't buy everything from the company. It just buys some of the assets and liabilities. So you're literally buying a piece of the company, not in the sense of like buying shares of stock, buying a piece of the company, but literally you might buy one factory from a company that owns 10 factories, or maybe you'll buy a patent portfolio from a pharmaceutical company that has multiple patent portfolios for different things. It just depends on the situation. Now, in this scenario, the seller is taxed on the asset appreciation, so the sales price minus the book value, and they also have to pay capital gains tax on the sale. So the buyer in this scenario gets to step up their cost basis for the assets they acquired as part of the deal, and they can depreciate or amortize those assets. So that's the good thing for the buyer in this scenario. There's no deferred tax liabilities that get created because of asset write-ups. They get to kind of do their thing and get some tax benefits up front. And you'll see this kind of deal with private businesses, with divestitures, which is just a way of saying a company selling off a piece of itself. And you'll also see this with distressed publicly traded companies. You can imagine if there's a large publicly traded company that's going through some hard times, what are they going to do? Well, maybe as part of their strategic plan, they're going to sell off some assets. And on the other side of that asset sale is an asset purchase. Someone else is buying those assets from that company. So that's where you might run into that scenario. And then another scenario where you might see a different type of purchase is what's called this Section 338H10 election. Section 338H10 election. This is part of the IRS tax code in the United States. And we talked about this before, but just as an overview, this is a hybrid kind of the stock purchase and the asset purchase methods. You kind of get a little bit of both worlds here. So the buyer acquires everything, just like in a stock purchase, and the seller is taxed on the asset appreciation as well as pays the capital gains tax on the sale, just like an asset sale. And also like an asset sale, the buyer gets the benefit of this stepped up basis on assets, and they can depreciate or amortize those assets. So there's also no deferred tax liabilities created for asset write-ups because they get that stepped up basis. They don't have to write it up. So you'll see this kind of transaction sometimes with private businesses, divestitures, and distressed publicly traded companies. And another note with this kind of purchase is it's really interesting because the seller actually might get more money in the deal because the buyer is getting extra tax breaks. So in order for the seller to agree to this kind of transaction, they may say, hey, I know you're going to get some extra tax breaks here. Why don't you go ahead and throw me a little something extra for that? So you may be seeing this scenario where in a Section 338H10 election, the seller actually gets a little bit of a bump in their purchase price amount because the buyer is getting those tax breaks. So those are the three different methods of a purchase transaction. So specifically the structures. So we have stock purchases, asset purchases, and Section 338H10 elections. Okay, that's what I got for you today here on Investment Banking Insights. Have an incredible day. I'll see you next time. Take care.